The air in the grand chamber of the Concordance was a solid thing, a crystalline weight that pressed down on the delegates suspended in their gravitic pods. Below, the floor was a swirling abyss of nebular data, a live representation of the galaxy and its torment. Sectors of vibrant blue and green, once signifying peace and flourishing trade, were now corrupted by a creeping, cancerous red that expanded with every cycle. This was the chitinous maw, the void swarm, a tide of silent, ravenous biomechanical horrors that consumed worlds and left nothing but scoured bedrock and cold vacuum in their wake. For generations, the Concordance, a union of the galaxy's most ancient and powerful races, had known only stability. Now they knew only fear. High Lord Kalen of the Cathar Imperium stood rigid in his pod, his multifaceted eyes fixed on the encroaching stain. His people were warriors born from a world of brutal gravity and constant conflict. They had forged an empire with warships that were legends, vessels carved from neutron star alloys and powered by captive singularities. Yet their fleets shattered against the swarm like glass. The maw did not fight, it simply consumed. It did not strategize, it simply spread. It was a force of nature, a galactic plague, and it was advancing on the core worlds. The outer arms are lost, Kalen's voice boomed, the chamber's acoustic dampeners barely containing its raw, resonant power. His pronouncements were not of debate but of fact, each word a hammer blow of grim reality. The Silan's listening posts in the Veil Nebula have gone silent. The Janasi trade hubs at the galactic edge have been erased. Our fleets are being systematically dismantled, not defeated. We are facing extinction, and we are wasting time with hollow platitudes. He turned his gaze from the map to the floating pod opposite him, where Matriarch Lyra of the Silan Compact rested. She was ancient, her form a delicate lattice of crystalline flora and psionic energy, her presence a calming balm that was now failing to soothe the chamber's raw terror. "High Lord," she projected, her thoughts flowing into their minds like cool water, a gentle counterpoint to his fire. "Panic is a luxury we cannot afford. We have endured cosmic storms and stellar collapses. We will endure this." "This is not a storm," Kalen countered, his mandibles clicking with contained fury. "A storm passes. This is a hungering void, and it is moving toward Sector 7, the Sol system." He let the name hang in the air, heavy with implication and contempt. "The human sector, a system defended by treaties and good intentions, a system we are bound by ancient law to protect, yet a system whose inhabitants are forbidden from forging the very tools of that protection." A low murmur spread through the assembled delegates. The Treaty of Sol. It was one of the founding pillars of the Concordance, drafted after humanity's explosive, chaotic entry onto the galactic stage. In a brief but terrifying conflict that had reshaped the political landscape, humanity had demonstrated a capacity for warfare that had shaken even the Cathar. They did not fight for territory or honor. They fought with a terrifying, unified desperation, a logistical and strategic brilliance that felt almost pathological. They had been brought into the fold, but at a cost. The treaty was absolute. Humanity was forbidden from constructing, commissioning, or crewing any vessel dedicated solely to military purposes. No warships, no fleet. A species deemed too dangerous to be armed was now directly in the path of a foe that could not be reasoned with. "The Sol system is a liability," Kalen continued, pressing his advantage. "We cannot afford to divert our remaining battle groups to defend a species that cannot defend itself. It is a strategic drain we cannot sustain. The lives of our own people in the core must take precedence. We must consolidate our forces, form a final firebreak. Sector 7 must be abandoned." The silence that followed was heavier than any planet. The word was anathema. The Concordance did not abandon its members. It was the entire principle upon which their civilization was built. Matriarch Lyra's light pulsed with sorrow. "To abandon them is to abandon the Concordance itself, Kalen. It is to admit that our union is merely a convenience, not a conviction. The humans have abided by the treaty for centuries. They have turned their energies to science, to art, to exploration. Are we to punish them for their obedience?" "Their obedience is our death sentence," Kalen roared, the data floor below him flaring red in response to his emotional outburst. "They are a dead weight chained to our ankles as we drown. What can they do? Their system is filled with fragile exploratory vessels, lumbering industrial haulers, and delicate scientific platforms. They will be a banquet for the maw. And while our fleets die defending that banquet, the swarm will grow stronger." Its path to the core cleared. A third figure stirred. It was the prime emissary of the Janasi assemblage, a being of segmented carapace and 1,000 tiny, clicking limbs. Its voice was a dry, passionless rustle, the sound of ancient parchments being scraped together. The Treaty of Saul, Article 4, Section 12, is clear. The Concordance is obligated to provide for the defense of the Sol system in the event of an external, non-sentient existential threat. The Maw qualifies. To abandon them is a violation of foundational law. The legal and political ramifications would be catastrophic. The assemblage cannot condone it. Your laws will be cold comfort when the swarm is dissolving your precious archives into nutrient slurry. Kalen shot back, his contempt for the J-Nazi's bureaucratic obsession palpable. He lowered his voice, forcing a measure of calm that was more menacing than his rage. Think, all of you, what is humanity? A young race, a volatile race, a species we had to chain for the safety of the galaxy. We chained them, and now we must carry them. I say we cut the chain. Matriarch Lyra's psionic voice filled the chamber again, this time with a note of steel beneath the calm. You speak of them as if they are children, High Lord. They are not. They are different. When we forged the treaty, we saw their ferocity, but we also saw their resilience. We saw their capacity for unified action, a focus that bordered on the absolute. We feared it, so we forbade them from making weapons. But did we ever stop to consider what they might build instead? Kalen scoffed. They built laboratories and museums. They will be of great interest to the swarm's digestive enzymes. We have delayed this long enough. The motion must be put forward. Seed Sector 7. Consolidate at the Rigel line. It is the only logical, the only survivable course of action. The tension was a physical force, a gravitational field pulling the chamber apart. The Cathar and their allied martial races were nodding in grim agreement. The more philosophical and diplomatic species sided with the Silan, their forms shimmering with distress. The J-Nazi and the machine intelligences of the Cygnus Collective remained neutral, bound by their logic and laws, unable to reconcile the strategic necessity with the legal obligation. The Concordance was about to fracture, its ancient bonds dissolving in the face of an unthinking, uncaring enemy. Before the schism could become permanent, Matriarch Lyra made a final plea. Before we commit this atrocity, before we sacrifice a member world on the altar of our fear, let us do them the courtesy of speaking with them. Let us summon their ambassador. Let us hear what they have to say. Kalen's mandibles parted in what might have been a sneer. To what end? So they can beg, so they can plead for us to die for them. It is a waste of precious time. It is the right thing to do, Lyra's thought voice insisted, her light growing brighter, a beacon of defiance in the growing dark. Even if their words are futile, they deserve to be heard. We owe them that. We owe ourselves that. We must not become monsters to fight a monstrous thing. The High Lord considered this. The political cost of refusing such a simple, righteous request would be high. It would paint him as a tyrant, not a pragmatist. He gave a sharp, reluctant nod. Very well, summon the human. Let them speak their final words to the Concordance, but let it be known that my position is unchanged. Logic, not sentiment, must guide us now. The survival of the many outweighs the treaty of the few. The chamber's central comm spire pulsed with a soft, golden light. A request was dispatched across the galaxy, a summons traveling faster than light through the Ansible network, bound for a small, blue world in a sector already being written off as lost. The great powers of the galaxy waited, their empires hanging in the balance, to hear the final, desperate plea of the species they had disarmed centuries ago. They expected tears. They expected recriminations. They expected a eulogy for a civilization about to be erased. The weight of their impending doom settled back over the chamber, heavier and colder than before. The only sound the silent, relentless spread of red across the galactic map. The human ambassador arrived not with the thunder of a desperate plea, but with a profound and unsettling silence. Her vessel was a small, unarmed diplomatic courier, a stark and lonely speck of silver against the vast, armored majesty of the Concordant citadel. It navigated the orbital defense patterns with a quiet, unobtrusive grace, a vessel designed not to intimidate or impress, but simply to arrive. When her image materialized on the central dais of the Grand Chamber, it was not of a refugee begging for aid. It was of a woman, dressed in a simple, dark blue uniform, her face calm, her posture radiating an unnerving stillness. Her name was Evelyn Reed. She stood Biff, or the holographic representations of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, a lone figure against a backdrop of swirling star charts and dire tactical readouts. There was no tremor in her hands, no fear in her eyes. She simply waited, her gaze sweeping across the assembled delegates, acknowledging each of them with a slow, deliberate nod. The Cathar, the Silan, the J-Nazi. She met each of their gazes with an unnerving equality. as if she were not a representative of a doomed world but a peer in a difficult negotiation. The silence stretched, and it was High Lord Kalen who finally broke it, his voice laced with impatience. Ambassador Reed, you were summoned to address the concordance on the matter of the defense of the Sol system. We are aware of the Maw's trajectory. Our time is limited. We expect you have a request for aid. Evelyn Reed inclined her head slightly. Her voice, when it came, was clear and measured, carrying through the vast chamber without any artificial amplification. It was a voice devoid of panic, a surgeon's voice in the midst of a crisis. High Lord Kalen, Matriarch Lyra, honored delegates, I am here not to request aid, but to inform you of our strategy. A ripple of confusion went through the chamber. Strategy? What strategy could a disarmed system possibly have? Kalen's multifaceted eyes narrowed. Your strategy? Ambassador, I believe you fail to grasp the situation. The entity approaching your system has consumed battle fleets from races that have waged war for millennia. Your world has no fleet. You have no warships. You have no means of resistance. That is correct, Reed replied, her calm unshaken. The Treaty of Sol has been faithfully upheld. We have built no warships. We have dedicated no infrastructure to the singular purpose of destruction. We have no fleet. She paused, letting the words settle, confirming their deepest fears and assumptions. Then she continued. However, the treaty was very specific in its language, a point for which we have always been grateful to the J-Nasi delegates who helped draft it. It forbade us from building vessels of war. It did not forbid us from building. The J-Nasi Prime emissary's limbs clicked in affirmation. The legal precision was, of course, impeccable, but the point seemed moot. What did it matter? Ambassador Reed made a subtle gesture with her hand, and the main holographic display behind her shifted. The grim map of the galaxy with its bleeding red stain was replaced by a detailed schematic of the Sol system. It was not a military map. There were no defensive perimeters, no fleet markers. Instead, it was a dizzying, complex web of industrial infrastructure. Lines of light crisscrossed the system, showing the paths of immense, automated cargo haulers. Icons denoted vast asteroid mining operations in the belt, their mechanical arms patiently cracking open mountains of rock and ice. Great, shimmering rings surrounded Mars and Venus, identified as planetary terraforming engines. In the outer system, near the gas giants, were colossal structures labeled as stellar lifting platforms and deep space construction yards. It was a portrait of a civilization utterly dedicated to commerce, industry, and creation. Kalen grunted in dismissal. A display of your economic achievements is irrelevant, Ambassador. These are the tools of peace. They will be the first things consumed by the Maw. Tools are defined by their application, High Lord, Reed said softly. You forbade us from forging swords, so we beat our metal into plowshares, but we are a species that remembers the forge. We have simply learned to build a better plowshare. The display zoomed in on the asteroid belt. Thousands of icons, representing the mining drones and extraction platforms, began to glow. Our asteroid mining operations, Reed explained, her voice steady, have for the last 2 centuries been perfecting the art of moving celestial bodies with absolute precision. Our largest drones can alter the trajectory of a nickel-iron asteroid the size of a small moon. We have been doing this to bring resources to our forges. Today, we will use this system to bring the forges to the enemy. The display simulated a wave of objects, thousands of them, from city-sized asteroids to smaller, faster projectiles, being propelled from the belt inward, forming a dense, layered kinetic barrier, a storm of guided mountains aimed at the projected entry point of the swarm. It wasn't a volley of missiles. It was a re-engineering of the system's own gravity and mass. The delegates stared, a dawning unease beginning to penetrate their certainty. It was crude, perhaps, but the sheer scale was breathtaking. Reed's hand gestured again, and the focus shifted to the terraforming rings around Mars. Our atmospheric processors on Mars are designed to generate and contain continent-spanning electromagnetic fields to protect the nascent atmosphere from solar radiation. They can project a focus. Directional electromagnetic pulse of staggering intensity. A pulse sufficient to overload and fuse any unshielded biomechanical circuitry within millions of kilometers. The simulation showed the great rings glowing with fierce, blue-white energy, unleashing a coordinated wave of M interference that washed over the incoming kinetic wall, designed to act as a 1-2 punch. A physical blow followed by a neurological one. This is madness, a Cathar delegate muttered, his voice a low growl of disbelief. You would weaponize your own infrastructure. You would risk a cascade failure that could destroy your entire system. The alternative is the assured destruction of our system, Reed countered without missing a beat. We are not being reckless. Every action has been calculated, every contingency modeled by our most advanced analytical engines. This is not improvisation. This has been our defense doctrine for 100 years. We call it the Anvil Protocol. The display shifted again, moving to the colossal gas giants of the outer system. The stellar lifting platforms, immense orbital factories designed to siphon hydrogen and helium for fuel and construction, came into focus. These platforms, Reed said, her voice holding a new, deeper resonance, are at their core the most powerful gravity manipulation devices ever constructed by our species. They can create and sustain localized gravity wells strong enough to pull streams of plasma from a gas giant. We have repurposed them. The simulation showed the platforms working in concert. Their gravitic emitters, instead of pulling, began to project. They cast a web of interlocking gravitational distortions across the outer system, a subtle but immensely powerful net. It was not a wall. It was something far more insidious. It was a trap. The swarm navigates by mass and energy signatures, Reed explained. It is drawn to planets, to stars. We will give it a new star, a false one, a gravity well of our own making, positioned in empty space. The kinetic bombardment will break its cohesion. The M-pulse will disrupt its hive consciousness. And the gravitic net will catch the fragments, dragging them not to our worlds, but into a containment field from which there is no escape. The chamber was utterly silent now. The initial dismissal had turned to shock, and the shock was now curdling into a profound, chilling awe. The humans had not built a fleet. They had done something far more terrifying. They had turned their entire civilization into a weapon. Every factory, every mine, every ship, every station. It was all part of a single, integrated, distributed defense system. They hadn't violated the letter of the treaty. They had rendered its spirit obsolete. Lord Kalen stared at the holographic human, at the calm woman who spoke of redirecting asteroids and weaving nets of pure gravity with the same tone one might use to describe a shipping manifest. His warrior's mind, accustomed to thinking in terms of fleet strength and weapon yields, struggled to process the information. He saw not ships, but a system. He saw not cannons, but a philosophy. The humans had been forbidden from practicing the art of war, so they had perfected the science of it. And what of your people? Matriarch Lyra's thought voice was filled with wonder. Your civilians, your non-combatants. There are no non-combatants, Reed replied, and the simple statement was perhaps the most chilling of all. Every citizen has a role. The freighter captain who repositions his vessel to act as a sensor relay. The engineer who recalibrates a terraforming engine. The child in a classroom who is learning the orbital mechanics that make the Anvil Protocol possible. We were forbidden from creating a military, so we were forced to ensure that our entire populace could become one at a moment's notice. Everyone is a soldier. The difference is, our weapons are also our homes, our factories, our tools of creation. She finally lowered her hand, and the simulation of the Sol system's defense faded, replaced once more by her serene, unwavering image. We did not ask for your help, honored delegates, because we did not wish to place you in the position of having to choose between your laws and your allies. We will face them all with the tools we have been allowed to build. We will defend our home. The purpose of this briefing was simply to inform you of our intentions so that you may observe and perhaps learn. The final words were not spoken with arrogance, but with a quiet, profound certainty. It was a statement of fact, not a boast. The delegates of the Concordance, the ancient races who had looked upon humanity as a volatile, adolescent species, were speechless. They had come to this meeting to decide whether to sacrifice the humans to save themselves. They now faced the stunning realization that the humans had never needed their protection at all. They had only ever needed the Concordance to leave them out. One to bind them with rules they could then systematically, brilliantly, and terrifyingly transcend. Kalen looked at the woman, and for the first time in his long, war-filled life, he felt a tremor of something he had not felt since he was a frightened child on his brutal homeworld. He felt fear, not of them all, but of the calm, quiet, and utterly indomitable species that stood ready to meet it. The grand chamber became a theater of silent witness. The delegates remained in their pods, the debate forgotten, their own fleets and strategies seeming suddenly primitive, almost childish, in comparison to what was about to unfold. The main display was now linked directly to the human strategic network, a feed provided with quiet confidence by Ambassador Reed, who remained on the dais, a silent observer herself. The data flowed not as chaotic battlefield telemetry, but as a symphony of precise, interlocking data points. It was less a war room and more an orchestra conductor's score. The chitinous maw arrived not as a fleet, but as a tide. A vast, dark cloud of biomechanical matter that blotted out the stars, stretching across a section of space so wide that light itself seemed to bend around it. It moved with a singular, mindless purpose, a wave of consumption rolling inexorably toward the warm, inviting light of the yellow sun. It did not communicate. It did not threaten. It simply was. On the concordance displays, the leading edge of the swarm was a solid wall of red, an absolute indicator of doom. Then the anvil fell. From the asteroid belt, a storm was unleashed. It was not a chaotic barrage, but a meticulously timed sequence of kinetic strikes. The first wave consisted of the largest bodies, behemoths of iron and rock guided by the immense industrial drones, their paths calculated to the microsecond. They didn't slam into the swarm head-on. Instead, they struck glancing blows, their immense mass and velocity acting like cosmic sheepdogs, herding and compressing the leading edge of the maw, channeling it, forcing its amorphous structure into a denser, more concentrated front. The energy readings from the impacts were colossal, each collision releasing the fury of 1,000 Cathar warheads, yet it was all cold Newtonian physics. It was the deliberate, patient application of mass. The second wave followed. Thousands of smaller, faster projectiles, the refuse of a century of mining, now repurposed. They plunged into the compressed front of the swarm not to destroy, but to disrupt. They were like stones thrown into a thick liquid, creating shockwaves and turbulence, breaking the hive mind's cohesion, forcing its individual components to react and scatter, however briefly. The silent, unified advance of the maw faltered, its leading edge becoming a chaotic, churning mess. High Lord Kalen watched, his warrior instincts screaming that this was impossible. There was no maneuvering, no flanking, no tactical genius in the way his people understood it. It was celestial mechanics weaponized. It was brutal, elegant, and utterly terrifying. He was watching a planetary system punch back. As the maw reeled from the kinetic onslaught, the great rings around Mars pulsed with an almost holy light. A wave of pure energy, invisible to the naked eye but a roaring cataclysm on the sensor displays, washed over the battlefield. The M-pulse. It was not an explosion, but a pervasive, instantaneous wave of static. Across the entire front of the swarm, the biomechanical organisms spasmed. Their internal communication, the quantum-entangled network that allowed the hive to function as a single entity, was momentarily severed. The mindless eating machine, for a critical moment, became a disorganized cloud of individual, confused creatures. The red wall on the tactical display flickered, dissolving into a million disconnected points of light. "By the first stars," a Scylan delegate whispered, the thought echoing through the chamber. They were watching a godlike power wielded not by a warship's cannon, but by a terraformer's shield. A tool meant to nurture a planetary atmosphere had just lobotomized a galactic threat. But the final act was yet to come. As the dazed and fragmented swarm drifted, its momentum carrying it forward, it encountered the trap. The stellar lifting platforms in the outer system activated their gravitic projectors in perfect unison. A vast, invisible web of gravity materialized in the empty space before the inner planets. It wasn't a wall to stop the swarm, it was a current to pull it. The scattered pieces of the maw, no longer guided by a central intelligence, responded to the most basic of instincts. Follow the strongest gravitational pull. They were drawn not toward Earth or Mars, but toward the artificial gravity the humans had created. Streams of chitinous matter, like iron filings drawn to a magnet, began to curve away from their original path, drawn into a spiraling vortex in the blackness of space. The humans were not just deflecting the tide, they were redirecting the entire river. The sight was hypnotic. A galactic monster, the terror of a dozen starfaring races, was being neatly and efficiently funneled into a single point. The maw, which had consumed worlds, was now being consumed by a gravity well of human design. The fragments spiraled faster and faster, compressing under the immense tidal forces, heating up, their biomechanical forms tearing themselves apart until the vortex became a brilliant, searing accretion disk of raw matter and energy. Ambassador Reed finally spoke, her voice as calm as ever, a simple statement of fact that landed with the force of a tectonic plate shifting. The collected biomass will be redirected into Jupiter's core. Its mass and pressure will complete the sterilization process. The swarm in this sector has been neutralized. Neutralized, she used the word a scientist would use to describe rendering a chemical inert. She did not say defeated or destroyed or vanquished. The emotional context of war was completely absent. It was simply a problem, and it had been solved. The grand chamber was silent for a full minute. The delegates stared at the display, where the last remnants of the maw were being siphoned away into the great, stormy eye of the gas giant. The red stain that had threatened the core worlds, the terror that had shattered the Cathar fleets, had been tidied up. It had been disposed of with the cold, clean efficiency of an industrial waste management system. High Lord Kalen slowly lowered himself in his pod, a gesture of profound, involuntary submission. He looked at the human ambassador, and the fear he had felt before was now replaced by an even more potent emotion: absolute, unadulterated respect. The kind of respect a warrior gives not to an enemy, but to a force of nature. "Ambassador Reed," he said, and his booming voice was humbled, stripped of its arrogance. "On behalf of the Cathar Imperium, I was wrong. We have misjudged your people. We saw the absence of a sword and assumed it meant you had forgotten how to fight. We see now you have simply learned to wield the mountain." Matriarch Lyra's light pulsed with a brilliant, joyous energy. "You have shown us a new path, Evelyn Reed. Not the path of the warrior, but the path of the builder. You have shown us that the greatest strength is not in the capacity to destroy, but in the capacity to repurpose creation itself as the ultimate shield." The Janasi Prime emissary's limbs rustled. The legal framework of the Treaty of Saul appears to have been creatively interpreted, yet not explicitly violated. The logistical and engineering brilliance is noted. A new addendum to the Concordance Charter regarding infrastructure duality is perhaps warranted. One by one, the leaders of the galaxy's great powers offered their own expressions of awe and gratitude. The motion to abandon Sector 7 was forgotten, a relic of a fear that now seemed foolish and short-sighted. The Concordance was not fractured. It was unified in a way it had not been for centuries, bound together by a shared sense of wonder at the quiet, unassuming species they had so gravely underestimated. Ambassador Reed simply nodded, accepting their words with the same grace and composure she had displayed throughout the crisis. "Humanity is honored to stand with the Concordance. We have always believed that the purpose of a civilization is to build. Today, we have simply defended our right to continue doing so." The crisis was over. The maw was gone. A new era of partnership was dawning. But as the technicians and scientists, both human and alien, began the long process of analyzing the data and the captured remnants of the swarm, a discovery was made that would cast the victory in a terrifying new light. A human xenolinguist, working alongside a Silan psionic analyst, was examining the core programming of one of the few intact biomechanical drones that had been captured rather than destroyed. The drone was mindless, a simple biological machine, but its core directives were encoded in a language of such antiquity that it predated even the oldest Silan records. It was not a language of conquest. It was a language of agriculture. A priority message was sent from the human science team to Ambassador Reed, who was still in the Grand Chamber, finalizing the new alliance treaty with the Concordance leadership. Her personal datapad chimed, and she excused herself for a moment, her calm expression finally showing a flicker of something new, not fear, but a deep, intellectual curiosity. She read the message, and her composure, for the first time, seemed to waver. She turned back to the assembled delegates, her face now etched with a gravity that made the earlier crisis seem trivial. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice low. "We have learned something about the maw. It was not an invader. It was not a plague, not in the way we understood it. She projected the findings onto the main screen. Ancient, alien script scrolled by, followed by its translation. The directives were simple, chillingly so. Target, unauthorized, and UN-compliant biological technological signatures. Directive, initiate sterilization protocol. Objective, prepare designated sector for planetary seeding. Status, awaiting harvest signal. Kalen stared at the words, his mind struggling to grasp the implication. Prepare for seeding, harvest signal, what is the meaning of this? The maw was not a weapon of war, Reed explained, her voice barely a whisper. It was a tool, a piece of automated farming equipment. It was a galactic plow designed to clear a field of weeds before a new crop is planted. The silence in the chamber returned, but this time it was not one of awe. It was a cold, primal dread, the fear of a rabbit that has just realized the shadow passing overhead is not a cloud, but a hawk. They had not defeated an enemy army. They had broken a gardener's tool. As if on cue, a new alert flashed across the galactic map. It came from a deep space observatory at the very edge of the galaxy, a joint human-Silen project newly established in the spirit of their alliance. It had detected a signal, a powerful, coherent message that was not emanating from within their galaxy, but from the void between galaxies. It was ancient, powerful, and it was directed at their cluster of stars. The signal was simple, a repeating mathematical sequence, but embedded within it was a message, a query. The xenolinguists and psionic analysts worked frantically, their minds joined in a desperate race to understand. The translation appeared on the screen below the Maw's ancient directives. It was two simple sentences. The field has been silent for too long. Is the harvest ready? The delegates of the Concordance stared at the message, the full, crushing weight of their reality crashing down upon them. They had feared the Maw, this unstoppable tide of consumption. But the Maw was nothing. It was a drone, a servant. Now, from across the unimaginable emptiness of intergalactic space, the farmers were coming to check on their crop. Ambassador Evelyn Reed looked from the terrifying message to the faces of her new allies, the Cathar warrior, the Silen matriarch, the Janasi bureaucrat. Their fear was a palpable thing, a cold fog filling the chamber. But in their eyes, she also saw a new, steely resolve. They had been tested. They had been united. Humanity, the species forbidden from building warships, had taught the galaxy that the tools of creation could be the most powerful weapons of all. They had shown them how to defend their right to exist. Now, together, they would have to teach the beings that were coming from the dark that this particular field was not theirs for the harvesting. The universe was infinitely larger and more terrifying than they had ever imagined. But they were no longer alone, and they were no longer afraid of the dark. They were ready to build, and if necessary, they were ready to wield the mountains again.